Welcome in. It is so great to have you with us today. I want you to start by picturing something.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Imagine a warehouse so vast it could easily feed every single person on planet Earth. Like it holds so much surplus inventory that we could actually overfeed the entire global population without even breaking a sweat.
That is a lot of food.
Right. But now, imagine walking outside of that exact same warehouse and seeing a line of people stretching around the block, suffering from a profound, persistent hunger crisis.
It sounds completely impossible.
Exactly. How can we possess an absolute abundance of food on one hand and a devastating lack of it on the other?
You know, it really is the defining paradox of our time. We have essentially hacked the global agricultural supply, maximizing yields to an unprecedented degree, yet we are still failing to actually nourish the world's population.
And that tension is exactly what we are tackling today. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a briefing from AP Human Geography, specifically topic 5511, titled The Global Harvest, Productivity versus Sustainability.
Right, and we aren't just reading a textbook outline here.
No, definitely not. We are using this briefing as a masterclass to understand the friction between how much we grow and how long our Earth can sustain it.
Because we really need to figure out together how our modern food systems became this absolute high-tech marvel that is simultaneously showing severe structural fractures.
Yes, and more importantly, what this means for you and for the economic reality of your own grocery cart the next time you go shopping.
To really grasp the mechanics of this, we have to start by setting the stage with the core tension of contemporary agriculture. On one side, you have the relentless, driving need to maximize crop yields to feed an exponentially growing population.
Right, the sheer volume needed.
Exactly. But on the other side, you have the desperate need to not completely strip the Earth's agricultural soil and water resources. We have to preserve them for future generations. That is the tightrope global stakeholders are walking.
Because left unchecked, the incredibly effective methods we use to produce food today risk rendering the environment completely unusable for tomorrow. I like to think of it like this. It is basically like having an incredibly powerful engine in your car. This engine is so fast it can drive you all the way across the country in a single day.
Okay, I like this analogy.
But the heat and the friction from running that fast might permanently warp the cylinders and destroy the vehicle in the process. You get to your destination, sure, but you are never driving anywhere ever again.
That is a perfect way to visualize the sustainability crisis. The agricultural industry is constantly trying to figure out how to drive that car fast enough to get everyone fed without blowing out the engine of our global environment.
And the way they've managed to drive so fast over the last few decades is through intense technological intervention. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the technology that gave us that turbocharged engine in the first place.
The sheer scientific leaps we have made are staggering.
They really are. And a huge part of that comes down to genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. Most of us know these hit the commercial scene hard in the 1990s, completely altering the baseline of agriculture.
Right, because scientists are suddenly able to alter the DNA of crops in labs.
Exactly, to make them resist specific diseases, withstand severe droughts, and produce unparalleled outputs. Places like the United States and Brazil have seen monumental benefits in their yield and adaptability simply by adopting these engineered seeds.
The output metrics are undeniable. But as an objective look at the data from the briefing shows, there is a significant analytical counterweight to those benefits.
Which is important to understand.
Yeah, very.
Sure.
Critics of GMOs raise serious systemic concerns, and we have to understand the mechanics behind those critiques without taking sides. These incredibly high-yield crops do not just grow in a vacuum. They demand immense chemical inputs to reach their potential.
We're talking about staggering volumes of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers.
Exactly. The core critique here is that this heavy chemical dependency poses potential long-term risks, both in terms of degrading the surrounding soil biome and the potential downstream effects on human health.
It really is the ultimate double-edged sword.
Yeah.
You get the yield, but you lock yourself into a chemical treadmill to maintain it.
A treadmill that is very hard to get off of.
And that chemical dependency isn't isolated to the dirt. If we look at what's happening in our oceans, we see the exact same crisis playing out in the water. We aren't just farming dirt, we are farming the seas.
Ah, yes, the blue revolution.
Exactly. The monumental rise in aquaculture. It is the controlled cultivation of fish and oysters, securing a vital protein source, particularly in Southeast Asia.
What's fascinating here is how the exact same tension we see on land replicates itself in the aquatic environment. Yes, aquaculture is feeding millions upon millions of people.
Which is a huge win.
It is, and it provides a highly efficient protein conversion ratio compared to terrestrial livestock. But these concentrated fish farms require immense energy and chemical inputs to maintain water quality and prevent disease outbreaks.
Especially with such dense populations in those pens.
Right.
And the briefing details some very specific ripple effects from this practice, right?
Yeah. Right. It isn't just about the fish in the pens. You have the severe nutrient pollution of neighboring waters from the concentrated waste that inevitably flows out of the containment areas.
That makes sense.
And you have a documented loss of local biodiversity because the natural ecosystem is thrown completely out of balance. Plus, perhaps most concerning for the end consumer, there is the reality of bioaccumulation.
Meaning the toxins build up over time.
Exactly. Toxins and heavy metals can accumulate in the fatty tissues of the very fish that are intended for human consumption.
Wow. So we have built these miraculous high-tech systems, both on land and in the water, that produce unprecedented volumes of food. But they come with these heavy environmental price tags.
They do.
But let's go back to that paradox we started with. If we are producing all this surplus food, enough to overfeed the world, why are people still going hungry? I want you to imagine an overflowing bucket of water, but the bucket has giant holes drilled into the bottom of it.
The food exists, but our bridge of distribution is entirely broken. The illusion of scarcity is one of the most misunderstood concepts in modern agriculture. The persistence of global hunger is not about a lack of total food production capacity. It is almost entirely a result of uneven distribution, logistical bottlenecks, and systemic economic barriers.
So if the food exists, then the breakdown has to be in the logistics. Where exactly is the distribution chain snapping? The briefing highlights two distinct concepts here that we need to define carefully.
The first being food insecurity.
Right. And for a developed world context, this isn't just missing a meal. This describes populations experiencing long periods of unbalanced diets. When people are food insecure, they rely on cheap, highly processed, calorie-dense, but nutrient-poor foods.
Which inevitably leads to long-term chronic health issues.
Exactly. And then you have food deserts. These are specific geographic areas, typically impoverished urban or highly isolated rural regions, where residents completely lack access to affordable, nutritious food, usually because there's no transport of funds.
And we need to emphasize that this is a structural failure, not a personal one. A food desert exists because residents don't have the transportation infrastructure to get to a well-stocked store, or they lack the financial resources to buy fresh produce, even if a market were nearby.
This is not just a problem happening somewhere else in the developing world.
No, not at all. Food insecurity and food deserts are deeply entrenched issues occurring in fully developed nations right in the shadows of unimaginable agricultural abundance.
So what is actually causing these holes in the bucket on a macro level?
A critical factor is baseline infrastructure. Think about the complex logistics required to actually move perishable food from a rural farm to an urban plate.
It's a massive undertaking.
It really is. It requires functional deep-water seaports, reliable freight rail lines, continuous cold chain refrigeration, and paved roads. In many isolated rural areas of developing nations, these things simply do not exist.
So you can grow a bumper crop, but you can't move it.
Exactly. If you have no physical road or refrigerated truck to transport it to the hungry populations that need it before it rots, that food is economically useless.
And then you factor in the weather, which creates this terrible double standard. The briefing points out that droughts and floods can devastate crops, regardless of where they are planted.
Nature doesn't discriminate.
Right. But when a severe weather event hits farmers in core, developed countries, they usually have robust financial protections in place, like federally subsidized crop insurance. That helps them survive the financial blow and plant again the next season.
Conversely, for farmers in former colonies or developing nations, those financial safety nets are almost non-existent.
A bad weather event means total economic collapse.
Yes. A single drought doesn't just mean a tough fiscal quarter, it triggers widespread devastation for the region. The meteorological weather is exactly the same, but the economic resilience to withstand it is drastically different.
We talk a lot about developing nations and infrastructure, but there's a profound threat to global food distribution happening right in our own backyards, and that is suburbanization.
A very real and growing issue.
As urbanites move outward to the suburbs looking for cheaper housing, they're literally paving over vital, traditional agricultural land to build those subdivisions. We're taking the most fertile topsoil and covering it in concrete.
And the economic mechanism of that trend is incredibly direct for the consumer. When you pave over agricultural land, you permanently reduce the acreage available for farming near population centers.
Which means less local production capacity.
Precisely. And when supply constraints hit, the fundamental law of supply and demand dictates that the price of the food you buy at the grocery store must go up. The expansion of our living spaces is directly competing with the expansion of our food supply.
Every new cul-de-sac could be incrementally raising the price of a loaf of bread. But it's not just the land we are losing the food itself, simply because we can't store it properly.
This brings us to perhaps the most staggering statistic in the entire briefing. Approximately 25%. One full quarter of the entire world's food is lost simply because of inadequate storage facilities.
Wait, a full quarter? With all the preservation tech we have today, how is that physically happening before it even reaches a grocery store?
It happens because the technology is not evenly distributed. In developed nations, infrastructure allows for rapid transport from the field to state-of-the-art climate-controlled processing plants. But in developing nations, the absence of basic infrastructure leads to catastrophic crop loss during transit and storage.
So we are talking about highly preventable logistical failures.
Completely preventable. Imagine thousands of gallons of milk spoiling in the heat because there is no refrigerated transport to get it to a pasteurization facility.
Oh, that's rough.
Or picture moisture infiltrating grain silos, leading to toxic mold. Or pests like insects and rodents utterly decimating unprotected stockpiles because the farmers lack access to simple, modern, hermetically sealed storage bins.
So we are losing 25% of the food right off the top. That forces the agricultural market to react, which brings us to the economics of how farms actually survive today under all these pressures.
Which means looking at economies of scale.
Exactly. To deal with the demand, the high cost of chemical inputs, and the loss of arable land, farmers are forced to get bigger and bigger. They consolidate land and buy massive machinery just to drop the cost per unit of what they produce.
And that scale is what makes those sprawling farming operations profitable. But it actively threatens the survival of small-scale family farms.
They just can't keep up.
No, a family working a few hundred acres simply cannot afford the capital investment required for the high-tech machinery needed to compete with those incredibly low unit costs.
And market dynamics are only half of the economic equation here. We also have to look at the role of government policy.
Right, the briefing is very objective about how these systems operate on a federal level.
Especially in the United States, where the federal government heavily subsidizes specific commodity crops, namely corn, soybeans, and wheat. Now, these crops are undeniably foundational. They drive the national and global economy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the profound friction these policies create. While those federal subsidies provide vital economic stability for the farmers growing those specific crops,
Guaranteeing them a baseline income.
right, guaranteeing income,
Right.
but they inherently incentivize overproduction of those specific commodities. And critically, for our discussion on long-term sustainability, these financial guarantees actively discourage farmers from diversifying their crop rotations.
Or trying more sustainable methods.
Exactly. Why take a financial risk on a sustainable but unsubsidized method when the government policy shapes the physical landscape toward monoculture?
It makes total logical sense from a survival standpoint for the farmer, even if locking into a monoculture hurts the soil environment long term.
But I want to pivot here because it is not all failing logistics and spoiling milk.
No, there's a very active response happening. How is the market actually responding? Because what you, the listener, choose to put in your cart is actively shifting the global model. Consumer preferences are currently driving a vast rebellion toward transparency and sustainability.
We're seeing a powerful grassroots shift. The AP briefing details several specific movements where consumers are taking the reins. First, there's urban farming.
And this isn't just a few tomato plants on a balcony, right?
Not at all. This is a systemic integration of agriculture directly within city limits. It vastly improves local access to fresh nutrition and completely bypasses the traditional supply chain. To give you a sense of the scale, the briefing notes a staggering statistic. In China, urban farming currently produces 90% of the vegetables consumed in major city centers.
90%. Inside the city limits, how does that logistically even work?
It works through high-density vertical farming, rooftop greenhouses, and the intense utilization of peri-urban spaces. It completely redefines what an agricultural zone can look like.
Proving that cities don't have to be entirely reliant on rural imports.
Exactly. Then, moving to rural areas, we have community-supported agriculture, or CSA.
I love the CSA model. For those who haven't participated, this is a financial mechanism where consumers pay a subscription fee up front for a share of a local farmer's crop.
And the economics of that upfront payment are crucial. Traditional farming is incredibly capital-intensive in the spring, with no payout until the fall harvest.
You have to buy the seeds, fix the equipment.
Right. But a CSA guarantees a stable influx of capital for the farmers before the season even starts. It essentially shares the risk of a bad harvest between the farmer and the community. In return, the buyers get a direct say in what variety of crops are grown.
It's like sharing the venture capital risk, but your dividend is fresh heirloom tomatoes and kale. And speaking of fresh, we can't ignore the sustained boom in organic farming.
Growing without synthetic chemicals.
Exactly. Entirely avoiding the synthetic fertilizers and pesticides we talked about earlier with high-yield GMOs. What's crucial here is the consumer behavior. Buyers are willingly choosing to pay a significant premium at the register.
They are paying that premium for the peace of mind regarding their health and the lower chemical footprint on the environment. It proves there is a viable, profitable market for sustainability.
Another fascinating economic pivot for small farms is the rise of value-added specialty crops.
This is a great survival tactic.
The briefing gives a highly relatable example of this. Imagine a small dairy farmer. Instead of just selling raw milk into the wholesale market, where the price is controlled by massive economies of scale and the profit margin is razor thin.
They take that raw milk and turn it into artisanal cheese.
Exactly. They then sell that cheese direct to consumer at a premium price. The profit margin skyrockets, dramatically increasing the farmer's income, saving the family farm, and providing a high-quality good to the buyer.
It's about stepping out of the commodity race altogether. And finally, the briefing highlights the fair trade and local food movements.
Right. Fair trade ensures ethical wages in the developing world.
Yes, it is a formalized commitment by consumers and corporations to guarantee those farmers receive a living wage. This financial stability provides them with the resources needed to adopt more sustainable, long-term agricultural practices to maintain their certification.
While the local food movement prioritizes eating food grown within a specific radius of your own community.
Which ensures product freshness, certainly, but it also drastically cuts down on the massive global fossil fuel footprint required to ship a piece of fruit across 3 different oceans.
So when we pull all of this together, the high-yield GMOs, the leaky logistical buckets, the sprawling concrete suburbs, and the pivot to artisanal cheese, what is the overarching narrative of Topic 5.11?
If we synthesize the data we have covered today, the clearest takeaway is that modern agriculture is standing at a profound, critical crossroads.
We have the tech.
We do. Humanity has achieved absolute technological mastery over crop yields. We possess the scientific knowledge to grow the food. But on the other hand, we are fundamentally failing in our logistical systems of distribution, in our preservation of vital agricultural land, and in basic economic resilience for the developing world.
The challenge isn't growing more.
Exactly. The ultimate challenge of our era isn't figuring out how to grow more food. It is figuring out how to grow it smarter and distribute it fairer without breaking the system.
And that connects directly back to you. Every single time you walk into a grocery store or grab a tote bag and head to a local farmer's market, you are actively participating in this vast, deeply flawed, but constantly evolving global system.
The dollars you spend are the demand signals that shape the future of the supply chain.
I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over today, something that builds directly on the friction we just unpacked. We know that suburban sprawl is currently eating up traditional farmland, paving over our topsoil and pushing food prices higher.
Right, the supply constraints.
But we also just learned that urban farming in China is already producing 90% of the vegetables for major city centers. So consider this. If we keep losing our rural land to housing, but our cities get better and better at feeding themselves, could the sprawling, traditional rural farms of the past eventually become completely obsolete? Could the concrete jungles of the future actually evolve into our primary global breadbaskets?
It is a profound geographic shift to consider.
It really is. Next time you're standing in the produce aisle deciding between the imported strawberries and the local greenhouse greens, remember the vast global system you're voting for. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll see you next time.